Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Obama was willing to pay a steep price in exchange for Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. The Guantanamo Five are top Taliban commanders, and the group has tried to free them for more than a decade. According to a 2008 Pentagon dossier on Guantanamo Bay inmates, it was disclosed by WikiLeaks, all 5 men released were considered to be a high risk to launch attacks against the U.S. and its allies if they were liberated. Mullah Mohammad Fazul is Taliban's former deputy defense minister and is wanted by the United Nations for his role in massacres targeting Afghans' Shiite Muslim population. Mullah Narullah Nouri was a senior Taliban military figure directly subordinate to Taliban's supreme leader, Mullah Omar. Nouri led troops against U.S. and coalition forces and is also wanted by the UN for possible war crimes, including the murder of thousands of Shiites. Abdul Haq Wasik is a former deputy minister of intelligence. At one point, he tried to cooperate with U.S. forces in Afghanistan, asking for a GPS system as well as a special radio to communicate with the U.S. military after the invasion in 2001. His dossier says that while he was deputy intelligence minister, he was a crucial liaison between the Taliban and other Islamic fundamentalist groups. Mohammed Nabi Omari held several military leadership posts for the Taliban. He helped organize the al-Qaeda and Taliban militias that fought against U.S. and coalition troops in the first year of the war. Nabi maintained weapons caches and supported extremist activities by smuggling fighters and weapons. Nabi maintains strong ties to active networks. Khair-ullah Karikwa, a former Taliban governor of Herat, was considered by the Pentagon's 2008 dossier to be a likely heroin trafficker and a major opium drug lord in western Afghanistan, and he likely participated in meetings with Iranian officials after 9/11 to help plot attacks on U.S. forces. The dossier says the detainee claimed to be a longtime friend of Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai. According to AfghanistanAnalysts.org, Karikwa is the most senior of the 5 on the list. He is one of the fraternity of original Taliban who launched the movement in 1994. In other words, he is someone who will still command a great deal of influence and respect among today's insurgents. This week's secret diplomacy was not the first time the U.S. government has engaged the Taliban in an effort to negotiate a prisoner swap for Bergdahl's release. In 2011, State Department officials held a series of meetings with Taliban leaders in Doha. At the time, Dianne Feinstein opposed the swap, saying, "These are major Taliban figures. They are not minor people, and they will not be held in maximum security custody. Forget that it won't be Guantanamo, just maximum security custody. And in my view, there's no way of knowing what they may do and what kind of propaganda they may breed." Lawmakers suspected the released Taliban could eventually end up returning to the fight. So what has changed in the last few years? The United States just announced it's winding down the war in Afghanistan to concentrate on emerging terrorist threats elsewhere. The sudden release of these Taliban commanders now will end up replenishing the diminished leadership ranks of the Afghan Taliban.
Live on this June 3rd, 2014 Tuesday edition. I am your host, Alex Jones. I am on the road today. I will be riding shotgun with David Knight, co-host of the radio show, along with Paul Watson, who also co-hosts the radio show / TV transmission on a regular basis. So Watson will be joining us from England. We're also going to have another guest who has a TV network in England, a host on a TV network that he also helps manage, who's going to be breaking down Bilderberg 2014 and, again, Richie Allen. So we're going to have Richie Allen, David Knight, Paul Watson, and Alex Jones here today. Huge developments on the rollout of the Homeland Security Grid against domestic groups, breaking at Infowars.com. It's all coming up straight ahead on this Tuesday edition. I'm Alex Jones. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Tuesday, June 3rd, 2014. I am your host, Alex Jones, coming to you from deep in the heart of South Texas on the road with my family, but also working on some stories while I'm at it. We're going to have David Knight, host of InfoWars Nightly News and co-host of this radio show, along with another host of the Nightly News and co-host of this radio transmission, Paul Joseph Watson today, and we have some other guests as well. Everything that we have predicted so far is now unfortunately beginning to unfold. And I say that with heavy heart because we know the globalists, we know their game plan. And for those of us that are informed and that read the globalist own statements, it's hidden in plain view. We know the other shoe is about to drop. We know their battle plan. We don't know exactly when they're going to be executing certain aspects of it, but we know their goal. And we know that they always try to end up carrying out their goal. Even when they don't succeed, they try again. That's why the New World Order technocrats are in control. Now, you've got shows like Homeland where you have U.S. military troops, Marines, Army, you name it, that have been captured by Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and the Haqqani network. That's basically a globalist front group. I mean, those Muslim extremists exist, but they've been funded and protected, and they're doing a double deal with the globalist. That's on record now in Libya, Syria, you name it. Egypt, the list goes on and on. And you have all these shows, movies, dramas, cartoons, comic books, where returning veterans are Al-Qaeda. We have the Washington Times, we have the Forbes magazine, AP, Reuters, Southern Poverty Law Center, all of them in the last 2 years coming out with countless headlines that the vets are going to team up with Al-Qaeda and attack America. The vets are going to team up with Al-Qaeda and the Tea Party and attack America. The vets will attack your police department, police. This is what the media says. You've gotten the internal reports going back 6 years, been public for 2. We first broke this, but police all know you get these reports that say you will be attacked by veterans with IEDs fighting for Al-Qaeda. And the #1 terror threat is veterans linked up with the Tea Party and Al-Qaeda. Ladies and gentlemen, that's like saying in a comic book fashion that Superman likes kryptonite and puts it on a cereal in the morning. The most Islamophobic, if you want to use that liberal term, group is the Tea Party. The most pro-war group in the past has been the Tea Party type group. The last people, I know so many vets, so many troops, I mean, even if they don't like the wars and know the wars were a fraud, they had buddies and people killed in combat. I have a lot of family that are active duty. I mean, they absolutely hate the jihadis with a passion and want to continue to go re-up just so they can fight them and kill them and settle vendettas and scores. It is 180 degrees the opposite of reality, but that's how the PSYOP works. They found in psych warfare that if you put out a lie so big, as Hitler said, the bigger the lie, the bigger they'll, just repeat it enough, they'll believe it. To say that the Liberty Movement and the Tea Party and the Anti-Federal Reserve Movement, the pro-gun movement, the pro-family movement is linking up with Muslim extremists and that the veterans are linking up with both groups. I first told you this 6 years ago with articles written by Kurt Nemo with videos embedded with myself breaking it down, where I told you they were going to roll out white Al-Qaeda. Because we got internal Justice Department memos when Obama first got in. And people saw these memos we put out and the articles and just said, there's no way, you're nuts. About 2 years later, started hearing the first reports, white Al-Qaeda is going to hit, veterans are going to hit, veterans IEDs, they're going to hit, they're going to hit, they're going to hit. Now you got TV shows, movies, and now you've got Bo Bergdahl. And I've really had time to think about this now, 3 or 4 days. Whether he's just a AWOL guy that got picked up and turned or whatever, it doesn't matter. He's being used to sell the narrative now of domestic troops being Al-Qaeda. While at the same time, Obama doesn't care how much trouble he gets in now because he can pardon himself. It's also part of demoralizing the military on so many fronts and really setting the precedent now to negotiate with Al-Qaeda. And I've told you there's a reset going with Al-Qaeda where they're rehabilitating them in the Washington Post and in Foreign Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations publications. You can type in the term, we need Al-Qaeda. You can type in the term, Al-Qaeda's doing a great job. Al-Qaeda's going to bring down Assad. You'll see CNN stories of, oh, the government is reaching out to al-Qaeda now on social networks, being their friend. That'll reform them. That's introducing you to the idea that they're not bad guys anymore, except when we need to have them attack us to then take your liberty. No, it's the Tea Party and the veterans. And again, folks, I'm not tooting my horn. I study the globalists. I mean, we have incredible sources. I mean, I have retired 3-star general sources. I have retired 2-star generals, 1-star admirals. You've heard some of them on the air. I've had former Joint Chiefs on, like Admiral Moore before he died. One of the most famous spies, but not famous because he is a real spy, would be Pachinik, who the Jack Ryan character on record, Clancy said that he was based on. And I mean, it's really true. The Justice Department's getting set to indict him for 30 years ago, reportedly not negotiating with the Red Brigade when they killed the Prime Minister of Italy. And Paul Watson has an article out on that today. I mean, I'm here on air interviewing people that only come on this show and break this news. And quite frankly, I don't even know why in my life I'm in such a bizarro world. I'm not here bragging about all this. It's incredibly dangerous. There's no doubt they're trying to indict Pachinik right now because he comes on this show and blew the secrets of the CFR wide open here. There's no doubt. So I just want listeners to understand something. You're getting real information here, and I'm risking my life and my name and my treasure and my family to bring you this information. And I don't want your thanks. I want your prayers, because we're doing something real here. And it's an example of how we can change the world together. You go up to Infowars.com. We have that article dealing with Pachinik I'm going to be covering later. But Obama administration pursues ex-State Department official for refusing to negotiate with terrorists. Steve Pachinik accused of being complicit in the murder of Italian Prime Minister. Folks, Pachinik's been accused of that in the BBC, the London Telegraph, the big Italian papers for years. They're having a parliamentary governmental investigation last year of the CIA and the Army for that. And I'll tell you point blank, folks, I don't think Pachinik's a bad guy. He believes in what he's done. And I'll get him back on now that he's willing to talk about this. He's never been willing to talk about this before. But this is all Gladio type stuff. I'm not saying Pachinik was involved in that. But then there's the argument, well, we stopped the communists from taking over. So what do you want to let the communists take over Italy, Alex? We did what we had to do in combat. I mean, this is the attitude of these guys. But now you notice Gladio's false flags, folks, if you're a new listener. Famous false flags. And you would see that as a false flag. Pachinik, they say, manipulated the Red Brigade into killing him so that they could then turn everybody against the communists for killing the Prime Minister, who was popular. But still, that's not really a false flag in the classical sense. If he didn't negotiate and they killed the Prime Minister, then how are they trying to indict him? He even gave the case number yesterday. We looked it up. It's on Infowars.com. It's a huge story. Now, let's shift gears here, folks. I just got into that so you understand the level we're at. I'm in this way above my head. I'm in this 1,000 feet above my head. But let's get something clear. Anyone in government, Obama, the Clintons, the globalists, Vladimir Putin, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, anybody who thinks that they're in control of this and that they're in over their heads are lying to themselves. The truth is, we're all in over our heads. The establishment is out of control. They can't even see the angles anymore because there is no chivalry, there is no honor. Pachinik was sanctioned on record for operations for the Army and the Pentagon and the CIA. This has come out in the hearings. They declassified it a few years ago in Italy. That's when they declassified. The government knew that Gladio was with the U.S. Army staging terror attacks and blaming on the communists. Separate thing, but in the same basket that the Italian government was in on as well. When you look at this, now they're trying to burn Pachinik and opening up this whole can of worms just because he comes on this show. You can guarantee he hardly even publishes books anymore. He co-authored stuff with Clancy, produced movies, you name it. It's kind of a shadowy guy. Nobody even knows what he really looks like. And then now they're trying to put him in jail. I mean, that shows how reckless they are. And then no one releases somebody like Bergdahl, who's clearly bare minimum AWOL, for 5 terrorists, knowing now that even if they're not terrorists, people will start grabbing embassy people, military people, officers. Nobody's safe. I mean, you don't do things like this. You don't negotiate with terrorists. Their attitude was that the people at Waco were terrorists when they weren't. They were domestic group attacked premeditatedly. But they burned that place down and sent Delta Force in to blow up the church records vault, the concrete building inside, to kill the kids with a shape-charged mine on the roof, because the attitude was, we kill everyone, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And the Delta Force memo came out that we're going to be pulling triggers, and this is not an arrest situation. We have the FLIR footage of them killing everybody that tries to go out the back. So anybody who's done these operations for the globalists now, you can be hung out to dry. So that's what I'm saying. Don't be involved in stuff like this. Don't do immoral stuff where you stage terror attacks believing you're fighting something even more evil, so you do it to blame it on the evil, to bring down the evil. You don't defeat the evil, you become the evil. Now, when we come back, we'll talk to David Knight, holder to create Homeland Security domestic task force in every town. It's coming. It's Northcom. Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. We're here live. I'm your host, Alex Jones. Riding shotgun today are David Knight and Paul Watson. And I'll be handing the baton to them in the second and third hour today. I'll be hosting all of the shows coming up next week back in studio. But I think it's great to get some of the other hosts in here, because I think they do just as good a job as I do. In some cases, even better. David Knight's got really painful but also powerful news dealing with suffocating babies. The government's latest evil, because if they can set the precedent to do that with premature babies and go, oh, it's bioethics, it's for research, you know, we're shooting black people up with syphilis, it's for research too. Then, oh, it's just abortion, it's not killing a baby, it's just infanticide. Then they can get away with anything. So, you know, you've heard about them heating hospitals with burned babies and killing babies out of the womb. Well, how about suffocating babies? How about cutting off their oxygen? You or I do that, we go to prison, and we should. But when the loving government does it, oh, then it's okay. So, again, that is coming up. Now, getting back to this article on Infowars.com, holder to create Homegrown Terrorism Task Force. Well, let me give you a news flash. They've already done it. And the Viper teams and the TSA are to be the little federal minders. And they're armed them now. It's already happened with the Viper teams a decade ago or more. And then it's locally trained special units of police who get extra pay. So everyone scrambles to want to be part of that. These special event police were first just the SWAT teams. Now it's basically half the force in major cities like Boston, New York. And it's just the federalization of police. And the new target, Holder, you can go watch the video report at Infowars.com. Holder says it shouldn't be overseas and shouldn't be Al-Qaeda. Just what the secret document said 6 years ago. You guessed it, it's who? Veterans, gun owners, Tea Partiers, because they're with who? Al-Qaeda. Now, the White House is really with Al-Qaeda. 60+% of the force attacking Assad for 3+ years is Al-Qaeda. It's on record, but it's public. It doesn't matter. No. I'm a libertarian constitutionalist gun owner. So, see, I'm a suspect now with Al-Qaeda, yes. And I've also got Keebler elves in my pocket. And I rode to work today on a unicorn. And when I go to the bathroom, folks, potpourri comes out. I mean, I don't mean to be gross here, but this is pure BS. And everybody knows it. But we need to call these scum out, because it's meant to be over the top. But the general public goes, well, it's so over the top, it must be true. And then the cops are just, get up against the wall, you might be one of them. I mean, it's just, no, I reject it, okay? I don't use the drugs the government ships in on record. I'm not involved in all the government corruption, all the corporate corruption. I'm not guilty. I'm innocent until proven guilty, not innocent until I'm proven a collectivist, progressive slave. You people are the ones involved in all the weirdness. I mean, look at Akron and all these navigator groups they've got. Of course we predicted they'd be engaged in all these new crimes. And now it turns out in every major city, the navigators are just stealing money, stealing IDs, I mean, it's a criminal group, folks. And criminals get off on doing bad things. They get off on releasing a deserter and releasing 5 terrorists. They get off on teaching kids that, you know, and showing 5-year-olds in public schools 2 men French kissing. A normal person just doesn't want to corrupt a kid with heterosexual or homosexual stuff. They're deviant, ladies and gentlemen. I never get sick of camping, never get sick of fishing, never get tired of hanging out with my buddies and laughing, never get tired of, beautiful women, looking at them, admiring them. I just like normal stuff. Never get tired of the Caribbean, never get tired of the sun, never get tired of enchiladas, never get tired of playing with my children, never get tired of beautiful art, never get tired of great weather, never get tired of being honorable. Just I'm not into screwed up things. They are, and they're coming after us. And they're saying we're Al-Qaeda. And if we roll over and let them say we're Al-Qaeda when they publicly run Al-Qaeda, then we deserve what we get. Attorney General Eric Holder unveiled his plan to create a new Justice Department task force this week, which will focus on the threat of homegrown terrorism. In the video posted on the department's website Monday, which we have linked, but I want you guys to go get it. I want to play that. I don't know why we didn't embed it, but for whatever reason. In the video posted to the department's website Monday, Holder, in fact, just call Watson, ask him to link to it. Holder argued that the focus on terrorism should return to the U.S. as opposed to remaining overseas. We face an escalating danger from self-radicalized individuals within our own borders, Holder said, as the nature of the threat we face evolves and include the possibility of individual radicalization via the internet. See, the internet and free speech is terrorism now. It is critical that we return our focus to potential extremists here at home. We're going to come back and finish this and then get to the special information that's really incredible with babies. I say cutting off oxygen to babies in the neonatal unit, I think that's terrorism. Promoting George Washington and private property and the family and guns is not terrorism. But to scumbag criminal filth it is, who wants to indict our guest, Dr. Pachinik, because he comes on this show. All right, we're going to David Knight here in just a few minutes to get his take on the Justice Department's full rollout with local domestic spy units, you name it, looking for the terrorist. That means the ATF, back to the Clinton days, burying pipe bombs on your property and saying Alex Jones had pipe bombs. That's the standard deal that they did to literally hundreds of people back under Clinton. Or having one of their informants claim, yeah, I heard Alex at the bar. He was claiming he was going to, shoot the governor or something. Let's get one thing straight. I don't have any illegal weapons. I don't plan any offensive attacks against government. Never have, never will. I'm in the info war, but I will defend myself if attacked by anybody. And I have that natural right. But just last week, the ATF wants to ban tannerite. We have a shooting show we do occasionally for InfoWars Nightly News, and you can go to the store and buy tannerite. And might as well ban fireworks if you're going to ban that. I mean, the mortars you shoot out of a firework are probably 20 times more powerful explosively than tannerite. I know, I've played around with it, fireworks and tannerite on the shooting range on TV. And they're now trying to say that's terrorism and ban it. They want to make us the bad guys. They want to shift this whole bureaucracy onto us. That's what always happens in countries. That's what tyranny is government decides to just take over via the special interests that are controlling it. And you can go to the report on Infowars.com where we have the quotes from the Justice Department's own website. And we have the new Department of Defense directive saying their main mission is fighting domestic groups, the Tea Party here in America. That came out last week in the Washington Times, Bill Gertz. So we also have Fox News and Napolitano doing a report on the FBI creates then foils 99 out of 100 terror plots. Even the New York Times had to admit 99 out of 100. And I want to give government credit. This only happens to me maybe once a year now. It used to happen at gas stations, at the shopping mall, at the grocery store, at any video signing event or any event I went to. They would have 2 or 3 different feds come up and say, hey, Alex, let's start killing feds. Let's start blowing stuff up. Come out in the parking lot. I've got a rocket launcher. And I would just say, you're obviously a fed or a federal informant. Hey, get a camera on this guy. And they go, hey, no big deal, Alex. See you later. Just making sure you're not planning anything. I mean, half the time they would admit they were feds. Guys would get on both sides of me on an elevator and go, want to attack the State Department today, Alex? We know how to attack it. And I'm just like, 6'4" giant Marine Corps colonels. And I go, you guys are Marines, aren't you? I know that's who guards the State Department. Well, we do know people with State Department security. You better not plan anything. And I'm just like, you guys are really a joke. And I start taking photos of them. I mean, you know, that happened at Bilderberg in 2008 because Hillary and Obama were there, and they were hopping mad. This is at my hotel 3 miles away. I've got Marine Corps office. You know, I mean, it's just they were driving around flipping us off and stuff. Their underlings days later following us around. So I'd pull over and get out, and then they'd drive off. I mean, it's like, look, I haven't done anything. I'm a good guy. Just because you say I'm a bad guy and imagine I'm doing something wrong, that's not true. The globalists are the ones running this country into the ground that have hijacked it illegitimately. And I'll use the French analogy of the Vichy French who stood down to Hitler. You have to dig into the history books, but that's really a fact. The French just stood down, folks, because most of their general staff have been paid off. They were then made the oligarchs, the dictators of France. And if you guys want to sell out to this, you know, be my guest. You're going to be hung out to dry, and we're going to be opposing you. Your bosses will hang you out to dry from one angle, and we're going to be opposing you from the angle. Dishonor is not the way to go. And I know most people in the military, and the police for that matter, are not dishonorable. You're just compartmentalized. So that's why the globalists are having trouble executing all this, because they're up there on the news going, our new enemy is the Tea Party, and anyone who's an evangelical Christian may be court-martialed. That's Fox News with the Army manual last year saying, don't be part of the Tea Party or the evangelicals. You may be court-martialed. Obviously, the people saying and doing that are the bad people. I mean, this is a no-brainer. It's like the Simpsons episode where the aliens land. They have two big heads, and they're like, we have taken over your planet. Submit, and we will treat you nice, you know, like politicians. Or you can vote for Slore or for Gore. Or it's something like that. Maybe we can find the clip on YouTube. But I mean, if aliens landed and came out and said, we're your rulers, arrest Ron Paul, arrest Alex Jones, would you then say, yes, I'm for the aliens? Because the globalists are that alien to America, that alien to freedom, that openly authoritarian. Your children belong to us. Turn your guns in. Raising the debt does not raise the debt. 2 + 2 = 5. If you have a business, you didn't build it. We're going to teach your 5-year-olds that how two men French kiss. Everything is fine.
System. You'll have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
And again, if you're watching on TV, you can see the aliens there, but at the podium and everybody deciding, well, we better vote for one. I mean, I actually think if aliens landed, had green skin, but walked out and said, you're racist if you don't give us your children's brains, there would be people that came out with meat cleavers, hacked their kids' heads open, pulled the brains out, and would run up under Stockholm Syndrome, giving the brains to the aliens. I'm not kidding. In fact, if the aliens were scary looking, they would do it even faster because they would, oh, let me appease you. And the aliens said, good. Your children's brains are delicious. Now we're going to melon ball yours. This is the mind control of the normalcy bias, the mass Stockholm Syndrome, the learned helplessness, whatever you want to call it. I personally am done with it. Now, David's got some big breaking news we're getting up at Infowars.com. It's only at Drudge right now that I saw it, so we'll show that on screen in a moment when we get to it. But it's just par for the course, and we're going to break down the eugenics movement, medical experimentation on children currently going on. And this just broke. They've been covering it up since 2006. But before I go any further, the system is flipping everything now onto the American people. It's that simple. And they're announcing, yep, the Army's preparing for war against the American people. And it's the Tea Party gun owners veterans. Yes, we're going to set up local, rural, Homeland Security, military units to watch the farmers and to work with farmers to spy on each other. We should be spying on the criminal, illegitimate government. But again, people don't know about occupation. They don't know about collaborators. They don't know about infiltration. They don't know about corporate infiltration. They don't know about economic hitmen. The third world knows about this. We have been so free here for so long, we literally have no political immune system to this and are wide open, and it's happening. The good news is military brass were concerned and leaked this information to the Washington Times last week that we covered so much. And it's just the latest signpost. We already know that here. But the point is, a debate is forming. And then now the Justice Department's out today, you know, saying we need to target the American people. We're going to get that video clip and play it coming up in the next hour. So this is the reality. Now, before I shift gears into the culture of total experimentation, the culture of dehumanization with David Knight. Prepare to hand the baton to him and Paul Watson coming up for the next 2 hours, and a special guest that's also joining us from Europe with some breaking news and intel on Bilderberg and kind of the condensed final data or datum on that. I want to remind listeners that we have the very best products available, in my view, available at InfoWarsLife.com. And we have now the Super Female Vitality that's sold out, but they had close to 1,000 bottles at the laboratory that they'd overrun for us, knowing we'd need more. And so after that's gone, we may not have any for upwards of a month. We've only done internal, tests with folks that have tried it. It's 10 different known concentrated organic herbs that are known to revitalize women, their glands, you name it, libido, energy. We've seen bigger response with women with this than we've seen with men with the Super Male Vitality, and the response has been excellent with that. You've heard the rave reviews from callers, unsolicited. And we thought women went bonkers good, happy when they did the Male Vitality. It's got 8 herbs. This has 2 more with the Female Vitality, Super Female Vitality. It's just that it affects women more. They go even more bonkers in a good way, bouncing off the walls in a good way from what we've seen with energy, you name it, when they do the Super Female Vitality. So try it, ladies and gentlemen, regardless you're funding the broadcast and what we're doing. And then we've got the new X2 Super iodine that comes from 7,000 to 10,000 feet in the ground. That's how deep the mine is. Purple, true iodine crystals. We know of no other supplier or manufacturer that has this source. And it took group years to get this source. You had to jump through a lot of DEA hoops to get this source. You can do a lot of stuff, obviously, with the raw iodine. And this is now in the glycerin tincture from palm oil of the highest quality, totally organic. And I forgot to bring a bottle with me on this 5-day trip. And Richard, will you ask them to overnight it to our next destination, a bottle of X2 immediately, please? I'm literally kicking myself since I left Sunday, wanting my X2. I brought my Super Male. I brought my Silver Bullet. I brought my Lung Cleanse. I did not bring X2. I thought I brought it from my house. We have X2. It will sell out, but it'll only be a few weeks till we get more X2. If you want the X2, get it. It's available right now at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, we've still got the original Survival Shield that's excellent. I think it's great for children. Consult your physician beforehand because it's a lot more palatable and not as strong. Regular iodine is bound. It's black. It stays black on paper. It's still something great, something you need, obviously, in my view, and what doctors and others have said, and even the government admits you need it. But the issue is this Survival Shield is more palatable and is not bound and turns blue on paper, not black. Now we have the bright red. You've never seen iodine like this. Bright red Alive X2 that then turns electric blue purple on paper. We've got a test of that, just showing people just the way it looks to the eye, why it's so different against leading competitors. I'm not even against leading competitors. I started out a few years ago trying to protect my thyroid and other things and taking the Lugals and stuff, and it just hurt my stomach and it didn't feel good, and it just didn't have the same effect. And for some people, it's fine. Some people like the other type better. I think more power to you. You should stock it all. Because from what I've read, it may last longer than ours. The issue here is that this stuff is bioavailable right into the blood, from what I've been told. Just find out for yourself, regardless you're supporting the broadcast. 888-253-3139 to call and order. 888-253-3139. 888-253-3139. I want to thank you all for your support. And lastly, don't forget this hour was brought to you by mypatriotsupply.com/Alex. mypatriotsupply.com/Alex. Non-GMO, super high quality, amazing customer service, widest selection, who I choose to use for myself and my family. mypatriotsupply.com/Alex. Or you can simply call the toll-free number that's on that sub-area of the website. They have the specials right there. And you can also find a lot of other preparedness items at mypatriotsupply.com/Alex. Now, shifting gears to the report that just went live at Infowars.com that I saw on Drudge this morning that made me angry. If the globalists can set the precedent to nerve gas our troops and even kill them in secret tests, like Shad, and inject black people with syphilis, let them spread it for 50 years and die of it, total torture, microscopic worms that eat your brain. if they can just constantly do all this and burn down Waco and under U.S. Code Title 50, Chapter 32, subsection 1528, paragraph B, say that secret testing is illegal unless it's for law enforcement or research purposes, then it can be lethal. They have it on the books. They can kill us. Well, I say your law is a stinking fraud. But this is the technocratic, mad scientist, Dylan of Otramaru meets Joseph Mengele, angel of death mindset that is about kill babies up to age 3, kill the old, death panels, don't give the soldiers health care, much worse under Obama. It's a plan. It's a plan. And David Knight's got details of the report. We're working on getting the lady on. We've been working on it a few days, but now it's broken and gotten big. David Knight, tell us about this latest horror as we're totally dehumanized and as the government sets the precedent to kill us or bring us close to death and do illegal testing whenever they feel like it. Just like they've got caught doing secret lethal testing in New York State on foster kids, New York Daily News, until the kids die feeding little black kids pesticides. Al Sharpton said nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Alex. This is a story that's being broken by Cheryl Atkinson. And if you remember, just before I started InfoWars, there was a story that InfoWars broke about experiments that were going on by the government at the University of North Carolina.
You broke it because you worked with the group. Yeah.
Right. At the University of North Carolina, at their hospital. Now, this is at the University of Alabama at their hospital. And the parallel in both of these cases is that they're experimenting on people. There is no informed consent in either of these cases, of course, and you cannot, even with informed consent, do things to people that would threaten their life. Now, in the case of North Carolina, they were taking diesel exhaust and feeding that directly into a mask with people who were sitting in an enclosed room, and they had searched for people who had respiratory and heart illnesses because they were trying to bump up, this is under Lisa Jackson,
to then cook the books.
Exactly.
To then cook the books, and wasn't it hundreds of times the safe level?
Yes, it was. It was like 70 to 100, between 70 to 100 times what they said was lethal. And she had gone into congressional testimony, Lisa Jackson said, there's more people dying from fine particulate matter than there are from cancer, because what they were trying to do was to increase their bureaucracy. They were trying to increase the regulation. They're trying to shut down traditional power sources. But in this case, you have to wonder, what in the world is their agenda? And let me read from this report from Cheryl Atkinson, because what she points out, this is going back to 2006, a family with a child born at 24 weeks into the pregnancy. It's only 1 pound, 11 ounces. They say he lays motionless in the incubator, and he's in the neonatal intensive care unit. And so these people from the government, from a National Institute of Health funded study, come to them, and she says, I remember them telling me that they were a support group who would be pretty much hold my hand through the development process. Now, you talk about a cynical
These are literal, treacherous devil demons,
yes.
Literally preying on someone, lying and saying we're going to help your baby while they prepare to suffocate them.
Yes. Now, where does a support group come from? Well, you know, they could say, well, no, we told her that we were part of a study called SUPPORT. And this is an acronym, and they choose these acronyms very carefully. It actually stands for Surfactant Positive Airway Pressure and Pulse Oximetry Randomized Trial. But they can come in and say, we're part of a support group. Now, what they're actually doing is they're randomly manipulating oxygen.
And by the way, it's okay because it's a fancy acronym, support. It's okay to turn the oxygen off.
Yeah, exactly. And they presented themselves, this lady understood them presenting themselves as a support group. In no way did they ever tell these parents that they were going to randomly adjust the oxygen to this little premature baby who's struggling with so many health problems. You don't have to be a doctor or a rocket scientist to know that if you deprive anyone, especially a premature baby, of oxygen, that's going to cause...
That's right. And in the study, for those that don't know, with thousands of babies I was reading all over the country, that they would sit there and literally test what would happen when they started turning it off. I mean, this is unbelievable, folks. And this is their attitude, that we're animals and they're doing this to us. We're going to come back. I want you to read through the report and tell them exactly what they were doing straight ahead. This is who run things. But as long as you go, it's liberal, David, we need to stop being racist.
Oh, yeah.
Criticizing government's racist. We need to take the black children and give them pesticides so they die. Or Salon will write a mean article about us, how we're racist. We're here from the federal government. We've got a group called Support. We're here to support you when you're out of the room and stuff. We turn the oxygen down to watch your baby struggle, see what happens. And, of course, you'll find out that I bet money that some of the kids didn't make it. But who knows? Then that ropes the whole hospital into getting used to the secret testing and the bioethics boards and the attitude, oh, don't help that kid. It's premature. This is the new culture coming into medicine that we've been warning you about. And we could hire more people if we weren't taking care of these lazy vets. All the whistleblowers are coming out saying, we ought to take these vets out and shoot them. All our money goes to them. And again, used to it was troops, poor Appalachians people, folks in the Appalachians, and black people. I got to say, Hispanics, Mexicans in the Southwest, because I've read the studies and looked it up, they run from the, quote, free health care and the government vans. That's why they have promos in Austin telling the Hispanic immigrant population, trust us, get in the system, come. And they're like, no, we don't think so. But down in Mexico, too, they're running from the Gardasil shots. They're not stupid. But white people and blacks love it. And I mean, they love it. And the Appalachians, they come grab them even though they don't trust the government. So this is who they've been targeting. But now it's expanded just to anybody, premature baby. Well, when you're not looking, we're going to turn the oxygen off. How's that sound? David Knight, go over the report itself and tell us why you're hateful and don't want to support people. I wonder if I come up the street with a bag and say, I'd like to put this over your head so you can't breathe. It's for support. We ought to go out and do a promo like that and just say, can I put this bag over your head and start asphyxiating you? I mean, it's good for babies. I mean, the feds are doing it. You're not a terrorist, are you? Go ahead, David.
It's essentially what the Nazis were accused of doing. Right?
Don't be racist.
Just trying to, we'd like to know exactly what the sweet spot is for the appropriate amount of oxygen for these kids. That's what the National Institute of Health study was ostensibly for. They said that the medical personnel routinely give supplemental oxygen to babies born with immature lungs. Too much oxygen can cause severe eye damage, including a blood vessel disease and blindness called retinopathy. Too little oxygen may lead to brain damage and death. Of course, we know that. So that's why the NIH funded this study. But of course, unless you're Joseph Mengele, you're not allowed to do experiments on people without their consent.
Plus,
you're not allowed to do anything to people.
I've already dealt with people. I've already dealt with family in this. They already know the sweet spot for oxygen.
Right.
It's a little bit higher than they're supposed to normally get, and they balance it. If the baby's going to die without oxygen, you give it as much as you need to, and if it has eye problems, that's better than being brain damaged. They already have it all figured out. The NIH is just running around playing God, breaking the law to set the precedent. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. Now, you said we're going to find out some of these children died. Yes, one of them did. And her story, she's talking about 3 different families. In 2 of those families, the children are now 7 years old, and they both struggled, they said, with myriad health problems. One of those children died, a third child died within 3 weeks. So that's the thing. And what really strikes me, Alex, is not just that they would do this type of thing, because we've seen this, as we reported on, it's happened over and over again, but just this kind of manipulative, Machiavellian way they come in and say, we're support. They force this into an acronym that they can come in and use and make these parents think that they're a support group, that these children are going to get all the normal health care.
Well, it's like Patriot Act or Homeland Security or New Freedom Initiative or Affordable Care Act that doubles and triples your prices. I mean, it's all a big sick joke on us by these freaks. And that's the realization you got to come to, folks. I've only just now come to it after almost 20 years on air. The globalists really enjoy hurting people. I mean, those of us that aren't evil, we just don't get it. David Knight's coming up. I'm going to do 5 more minutes with him. We're going to hand the baton to Paul Watson and he, while I spend some good time with my children. But wild horses can't drag me away, so I'm still here. Folks, please spread the word about the broadcast. We have decoded the enemy operation. This show does have the pulse of what's happening worldwide. We need to reach more people. Tell 10 people a day about Infowars.com and the free audio and video feeds and your local AM and FM affiliates. It's vital. Stay with us. Hour 2 and 3, jam-packed. More on the secret experimentation. Tell people about the show now. Your email list. Don't wait. Take action. We need your help. All right, folks, into hour number 2. We've got so much massive news, so many important things we haven't even gotten to yet. We haven't recapped the final developments at Bilderberg 2014 and how important this year's coverage was. I wouldn't say as big as last year, but with thousands of protesters, but it was definitely a big year with a lot of foreign coverage. David Knight's going to be covering that in the 3rd hour with a special guest from England. Paul Watson's coming up in about 20 minutes. He'll be riding shotgun with David Knight as well. But David, getting back into the secret experimentation, this is only the tip of the iceberg. What else is going on we don't know about. And when the group you're affiliated with and worked with caught them, gassing people in hospitals, no one got in trouble.
That's right.
This year. And then now will anyone get in trouble killing preemies, cutting their oxygen off? I mean, it's just getting incredible.
That's right, Alex. I thought one of the interesting things out of this article was it said that 9 months after they had a public meeting to examine this, NIH and HHS officials have yet to propose a remedy to avoid a repeat of the controversy. Well, of course, because when it was exposed about the EPA testing at the University of North Carolina, the group I was involved with filed a restraining order, tried to get a temporary restraining order. The judge turned that down. They've now been rebuffed throughout the different levels. So the government is fine with this kind of stuff. And, of course, they're not going to get anything from the NIH to keep from having a repeat of this. It keeps on going. But let me read you this quote from an internationally recognized expert on research ethics. This is a Dr. Michael Carome. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. But he said, the word unethical doesn't even begin to describe the egregious and shocking deficiencies in the informed consent process for the study. He said parents of the infants who were enrolled in this study were misled about its purpose. They were misled to believe everything was being done in the name of standard care. Therefore, there were no predictable risks to their babies, and yet we see they have tremendous risks. Many of them have had serious vision disorders because they got too much oxygen. Many others have been brain damaged because they didn't have sufficient oxygen. At least one of the 3 that she's talking about specifically in her article died. So that's the situation.
David, this is too important. Paul Watson's going to be joining you in the next segment. I want you to start the next segment. I'm going to hand the baton to you right now. I'd like you to go back into these numbers and just boil down this Mingala level stuff for people and put bookends on it for them so they understand the elitist mentality, and then get into all the other news you're going to be covering today. What else are you planning to get to? I know Watson's adding the link to the Justice Department video in his article where Holder said the main threat is domestic groups. They're setting up domestic task forces to go after anybody that isn't a total criminal and anybody that loves freedom. What else are you going to be covering today, David?
Well, Alex, this is a story coming from Cheryl Atkinson. You remember she was a reporter who left CBS. She was absolutely fed up with the way the news was controlled and censored to promote an agenda. And so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how we're seeing real journalists stand up, like this young teenager, Andrew Demeter. Now, he was an entrant into the Paul Revere contest. He had several excellent entries in there. And, of course, he really embarrassed Nancy Pelosi just by asking her direct questions about the NSA's activity.
Let's get into that. Absolutely. Because absolutely, exactly, come back for people. Let's hit that story about the kids and then explain how it's a real journalist who did Fast and Furious, you name it, who left CBS because she was being censored, and now she's exposing this evil. We're the real journalists. Ladies like that are the real journalists, and we'll end up with the audiences and do the right thing and destroy the globalist just by virtue of truth-telling. And that's why they want to censor the web and want to get rid of whistleblower protection, because they're scared of the press. They tried to buy off the press. That just discredited the press. Now that the new press has risen with Drudge and InfoWars and WorldNet Daily and so many others, they now are going to try to shut us down free speech-wise. That's why we're in a race, listeners, to explode in size, to get up on our feet fully, and to really give the globalists a run for their money and to stop their censorship. That's why people shouldn't take for granted the fact that we're on air and that we'll be here next week. Only spreading the word and supporting us will do it. So we need that call to arms. David Knight, great job at Bilderberg 2014. Your wife and Josh Owens and the rest of the crew. I hand you and Paul Watson the baton right now. Give them hell, brother. We'll be right back. Alex Jones signing off.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here, and I'll be joined with Paul Joseph Watson. And later on in the show, we're going to have Richie Allen from the UK give us a British perspective on Bilderberg. He's been watching it very closely, as we have. Paul and I were both there in Copenhagen. And this year was a bit different in several different ways. I guess no 2 years are alike. We learned some things. We're going to be talking about that in the third hour with Richie Allen. We were just talking to Alex about this breaking report from Cheryl Atkinson. Now, she is a journalist who left CBS, and now she's working in an independent mode because she was tired of having her stories controlled. She said that she resigned because she feels like the mainstream media is heading down a dangerous path with attempts to censor or block stories that don't align with their preferred agenda. Those are her words. Those are our words as well. That's why we were at Bilderberg. For the longest time, that place didn't even exist because the mainstream media heads blocked any information about that and then ridiculed anybody who reported on it. Now they're still at the ridicule point. They can no longer credibly say that it doesn't exist because there are too many people out there reporting that it in fact does. Perhaps if people realize that they were lied to the existence about Bilderberg at the same time that heads of major media organizations like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like the Wall Street Journal were in attendance inside Bilderberg and they were telling people that it didn't exist, perhaps at that point people will start to say, why is it that 150 of the most powerful people politically, security, spies, bankers, multinational corporations, why are they meeting here? And they're telling us that they're not meeting here and they've got tremendous amounts of security. Maybe then they'll start to wake up and start to look at what is being done there. And we have a lot of quotes from the people over the years as to what they have produced there. But getting back to journalism, I think this week is a real highlight of what the difference is between the fake media and the real media. Now, this week marks the 25th anniversary of the crackdown at Tiananmen Square. That'll be tomorrow. That'll be when the government said, we've had enough, and they finally moved against them. And as I was abroad, there were a lot of articles about what's going on in China. And there was a quote from an Army general. He said he went to these meetings and he absolutely refused to use his division against the protesters. He said, I don't want to be on that side of history. I don't want to be remembered as a murderer. Well, they don't remember these people as murderers in China. Most of the people there don't know anything about it. Because for 25 years, there's been no news about what happened at Tiananmen Square inside of China. They have taken it out of the textbooks. They've taken it out of the news stories. That's what we don't want to see happen here. So Cheryl Atkinson's story, not only what happened with the government-backed study, and this, again, I want to repeat this. This is 1,300 premature babies. People who will do these kind of experiments to babies who are struggling to breathe, babies with tubes all over them to keep them alive. And what did they do? What was the response of our government? To play games with them, to play God with them, to adjust the level of oxygen. And again, as I mentioned, too much oxygen, the babies go blind. Too little oxygen, they get brain damage or death. And that is what happened. A government that can do this is morally capable of doing anything. And we've seen this over and over again. In the story that we broke a couple of years ago at InfoWars about the medical experimentation at the University of North Carolina, where the EPA was trying to make a case for greater regulations. And in order to do that, they were perfectly willing to make people sick or kill them. Lisa Jackson had just testified before Congress that she thought there were more people that were dying of particulate matter than people who were dying of cancer. And that was an obvious lie. And Markey, the congressman who worked with that, they had already rehearsed before what they were going to do, and he's coaching her. You can tell because he even steps on her lines at one point. It was really an obvious nonsense. But people didn't die there, but they were trying to get people who would be sick. They were searching for people who already had respiratory illnesses, who already had heart illness. And what they did then was they exposed them to levels that the EPA already said were fatal. They exposed them to levels that were 70 to 100 times what the EPA was maintaining were already fatal levels. Why? So that they could grow their bureaucracy, so that they could grow the regulations, so that they could shut down coal plants. Now, what is the agenda with the National Institute of Health that would cause them to go in and deprive premature infants of oxygen? Is this just out of intellectual curiosity? Because we already know what that does. They're trying to find a sweet spot. When I got my scuba diving certificate, I was told that was the way they had developed the bends tables for divers was through trial and error. Now, presumably, that was done with the consent of the Navy divers, but they do a lot of experiments on military personnel that they never get informed consent from, and that's the key. They were not willing to pull that back. They were not willing to put a restraining order on these experiments as they were going on at the University of North Carolina. And they wonder, is there anything that's going to be done to keep our government from doing something like this again? And I think the most cynical thing about this entire study is that this first couple that Cheryl Atkinson reports on, they thought they were a support group from the government that was going to help them go through the process. Support was the acronym that they used, just like the Patriot Act. Support, actually, they were not a support group. Support actually stood for surfactant positive airway pressure and pulse oximetry randomized trial. They put this in a constrained acronym just so they could come to these people and say, we're a support group, and not be flat out lying to them with their fingers crossed behind their back. And yet it was a lie. You cannot, ethically, you cannot ever get conformed consent for human experimentation that is life-threatening, that presents this kind of damage. Even if they had gotten the parents' consent, they would not have ethically been able to do that. But of course, they're already trying to get parents' consent for abortions. And as we covered yesterday, as Jakari Jackson covered on the nightly news yesterday, and Chris just brought this article into me, we had this up on InfoWars. This is a letter, a pastoral letter that Planned Parenthood was sending out, giving to people who are considering an abortion. And they said, if you'd like to speak with a clergy person, your local Planned Parenthood Health Center can refer you to someone who will be supportive of you and your decision. Your privacy will be protected. All conversations will be completely confidential. So there you go. I guess if you can, with a parental consent, murder a child, then I guess our government can do that to 1,300 children. But as I pointed out earlier, this is, I think, a week that we need to think about press freedom. We need to think about what real journalism is. You know, earlier Alex was talking about the revelations that Steve Pachinik had about being prosecuted, being pursued by the State Department, by Obama's State Department. We need to remember that under the Espionage Act of 1917, there have only been 11 cases since 1917. That means that in 92 years, there were 4 prosecutions. Then in Obama's 5 years, there have been 7 prosecutions. Do you understand that? You see how that's stepped up? And, of course, one of those people that's being prosecuted is James Risen, a New York Times reporter, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and he was just rejected from having his case heard before the U.S. Supreme Court because he did not want to give up his journalistic source. Now, this is a case where this is part of his book, his 2006 book, State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. And in that story, there was a CIA agent, Sterling, who told Risen, someone who told Risen about a mismanaged CIA scheme to supply Iran with inaccurate nuclear weapon blueprints. The misinformation ploy fell apart, he said, after the Russian scientist who delivered the plans noticed that it had design flaws, and he tipped off the Iranians. So this is something that was in his book. They want to know who the CIA agent was that did this. He's protecting his source on principle. He says he's ready to go to jail, and he may very well go to jail because Obama has been aggressively going after journalists while he's releasing Taliban people. But before I get on to that, I want to talk about the fact that we had this teenager, Andrew Demeter, who confronted Nancy Pelosi. Now, Andrew Demeter was one of the Paul Revere contestants. He entered several fine documentaries. That was a year ago. We've interviewed him in the past. Leanne McAdoo has interviewed him, and you can see that interview in the article that we linked to. But I think it's pretty amazing that he confronts Nancy Pelosi and, again, asks her the obvious questions. He says, isn't the NSA program where it's doing dragnet spying of the entire population, isn't that a violation of the Fourth Amendment? It really took her off balance. Do we have a clip of that we can play, guys?
Why do you support the NSA's illegal and ubiquitous data collection?
Well, I do not. I have questions about the metadata collection that they were collecting, unless they had a reason to do so. So I was one who I didn't support Amash, that resolution. I didn't think that was the appropriate resolution. But I do think that the burden is on the department, and I have fought them for years, on the community, fought them for years.
She's just rambling. She's not prepared for this. It's pretty amazing. You need to watch this whole video, complete with subtitles. Excellent job, Andrew Demeter. That's real journalism. I liked this quote, but before we go to it, I want to ask Paul Joseph Watson about this. He posted the article today, and we got Paul joining us from the UK. Hey, Paul, how you doing?
Hi, David. Did you get some sleep?
A little bit, not much. Kind of the sleep setting up in an airplane is basically it. How about you?
Well, I got back a lot earlier than you, so I'm lucky.
Yeah. This is pretty amazing. And as you pointed out in the article here, and this is the thing that I thought was most telling, is that he had to fight with C-SPAN in order to get their video footage. And the reason that they gave for it, they said, we wouldn't want to damage C-SPAN's relationship with Leader Pelosi and her office. So I want to get your comments on that as we come back. That's what it's all about, isn't it, Paul? It's about maintaining their access, because here's C-SPAN. You know, they're not like CBS, but they are like CBS because they want, even though they're publicly funded, they want access to those people. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. And I just want to get Paul's take on this article that he put up about Andrew Demeter, a teenager, confronting Nancy Pelosi about NSA spying. Watson, that was a great article. This guy is really good. We had several entries from him, as I mentioned before, in the Paul Revere contest. I really like what he had to say, and it's just a simple question that he asked her, isn't it?
Well, I mean, what we need to remember about Andrew Demeter is the fact that he's only 16 years old. And, you know, he's got to be one of the most eloquent 16-year-olds I've ever heard. That's right. So he's a credit to his generation, and he's an inspiration to others. But the key about the article and the key about this confrontation with Pelosi, let's remember, of course, that initially he was supposed to meet Harry Reid. This occurred back in April when Harry Reid called supporters of Clive and Bundy domestic terrorists. So he was planning to hand a copy of the Constitution to Harry Reid. So he had to go through this metal detector there in the Capitol. They asked him what he had. He said he had a Constitution for Harry Reid. That got cancelled. So Pelosi was the poor substitute. And so, you know, he had this opportunity to confront her about the NSA, but he was only able to whip out his phone after he had already asked the question and begin filming her. That's why he needed the C-SPAN B-roll footage, which they were filming from further back to get the whole confrontation. So, as he said, he went back and forth with C-SPAN on an email tug of war just to try and get this footage. And as you mentioned before the break, they pressed Demeter as to why it mattered that he got the footage. And it turned out that the quote they told him was, "We wouldn't want to damage C-SPAN's relationship with Leader Pelosi and her office." So that's why they were restrained on giving Demeter the footage in the first place, because they didn't want to damage their relations with Pelosi. So again, it drills down to this point whereby a 16-year-old with a cell phone camera is more hard-hitting, more of a muckraking journalist than a global brand like C-SPAN, backed by, you know, billions and billions of dollars of funding. And they're representative of the mainstream media. They don't ask hard questions. They're getting embarrassed. They're getting put to shame by a 16-year-old with a cell phone camera.
Absolutely. I remember when they were working on Obamacare and somebody yelled to Nancy Pelosi, "What's the constitutional basis for that?" And she just laughed it off and said, "Are you serious? Are you serious?" and walked off. That was very telling, but I just love the way she stammered and stuttered about this. I mean, she clearly wasn't expecting anything like this from some high school students. And he was very self-deprecating. He said, "If I, a shy, socially inept high school student," I'm reading from your article here, "can expose on a global scale the paradox that is politics by asking nothing more than a question, then so can you." That's exactly it. I mean, he embodies what we were trying to do with the Paul Revere contest, and that was to get people to realize that they could go out and produce their own news. They could do their own stories, their own films. They could get these people because, and isn't this the case, Paul, that what this really kind of shows us is that the real danger of one of the real dangers of violating everybody's privacy is the self-censorship that comes after that. Now, in the case of the news media, we see this as censoring themselves about what they want to say because they want access. But for us as individuals, once we get intimidated by the fact that the NSA is watching everything that we're doing and listening to everything that we're doing, it really does have a big effect on our actions. And I was told privately by one of the Danes that we met in Copenhagen that there were a lot of Danish people that were afraid, that were aware of what was going on with Bilderberg, but they did not want to show up there. They did not want to get their pictures on camera because they were afraid that that would have real repercussions for them because the government is so intertwined with people's jobs in the welfare state there in Copenhagen, in Denmark.
I think it gets to a point, David, where if you become as public as possible, then it goes beyond the intimidation. And in fact, you end up getting treated better because the establishment is so afraid of mistreating you that you might produce a story about it. You might throw the shame back on them. But you actually, the bolder you are, the better you end up being treated. Whether that applies to surveillance or not, I don't know. But exactly, it's an intimidation tactic. And when people say, well, what do you have to hide? You know, if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to worry about. Well, then give me your email password. Give me your bank account login access. They won't do it, but if the government's asking for it, it's all well and good. So again, it's that contradiction, but that's definitely a part of the NSA surveillance. It's about making us believe that we're all under constant watch, when in fact they can't watch what we're doing all the time. It's keywords, it's databases, and that prevents people from expressing their freedoms, just as...
We're going to be right. We're going to take a break, Paul. We're going to be right back. And what you said is absolutely true. We've seen that in the case of John Corbett. We'll talk about that as he went with the TSA. What they did was they backed off and said, all right, you got to pass for life. We're not going to mess with you anymore. We'll be right back.
March.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. Now, we were just together in Copenhagen for the Bilderberg meeting this year, and we're going to be joined in the third hour with Richie Allen, and we're going to be talking about his take. He's also British. We're going to be talking about his take on Bilderberg and how it was different this year. We're going to share some of the things that we saw there together. But before we get to that, we've been talking about journalism and free press, and there's a lot of things happening this week. You know, later this week, tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of the Chinese government cracking down at Tiananmen Square, pushing back against the people who are demonstrating there, the students who are demonstrating for their freedom. The day after that is the one-year anniversary of the Snowden leaks, and so there are some groups on the internet that are going to be holding a rally to try to get people to be aware that they need to do things to protect their own privacy. And as we were talking about this, it's not just the Tiananmen Square students. We had Andrew Demeter, someone who is no stranger to those who watch the Paul Revere contest or follows InfoWars. A 16-year-old, and he was in a position where he was able to directly ask Nancy Pelosi a question, and he got to ask her, what about the Fourth Amendment and the NSA? And she just started fumbling all over herself. Paul, when we were abroad, looking at the different ways that police interact with people and then going through all the hassles that we went through to come back into this country, I saw this article today about more U.S. citizens turning in their passports. They said 1,001 U.S. citizens gave up their citizenship in just the first quarter of this year, more than the total in 2012, and already about a third of 2013's record-breaking 3,000. Now, this article from the Washington Examiner is focusing on the financial aspects of it, but I think it has to do with the entire perspective, the loss of privacy. And there's another article that's come out about how this new financial database bureaucracy, that Dodd-Frank created, they are now going to start collecting virtually everything in the open from about 227 million Americans, looking at every mortgage going back to, I believe it was 1998. And every bit of supporting information about you and your household, demographic and personal. That's what I think a lot of people are leaving America, because they're worried about not just the money that's being confiscated, but the police state.
Well, the fact that more data is being kept than ever before is a given, but the ultimate scandal, of course, with the NSA is going to turn out to be that not just metadata, but distinct conversations, specific details about people's bank accounts, their online chats, every single shred of communication you can imagine is being stored. Because as former NSA whistleblower William Binney said, to store the metadata would only require relatively small physical storage space, the kind of space that the NSA have now got in centers like Bluffdale and others is so vast that the only explanation possible is that they're storing every phone conversation, we're talking audio, transcripts, we're talking emails, we're talking online chats. They're storing absolutely everything. Doesn't mean that they've got the personnel to analyze it, or indeed the computer algorithms that are strong or quick enough to analyze it all. But using keyword logging, they can begin to do that. That is the ultimate scandal. And I think eventually the Snowden revelations will start to lean in that direction. More and more confirmation that each shred of individual communication is being stored by the NSA, not just things like metadata.
Yeah, and since we haven't done anything about it, they're getting even more bold about this. And of course, we have a new bureaucracy that was created by Dodd-Frank. That's the, and listen to this, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's the same kind of cynical acronym as we were talking about before about the Patriot Act. And these people who said that they were going to, the support acronym that they came up with so they could go in and tell these poor parents that they were essentially a support group. Actually, they were going to be depriving their premature babies of oxygen or giving them too much oxygen, which creates vision issues. We see these kinds of cynical efforts over and over again, and we need to play a report here. I want to give people some information about health issues, because as we see over and over again, there's things that we can't do on a public basis, but we can do on a one-to-one basis. You know, when I was in Copenhagen, there was another guy that I talked to, and he said he's trying to wake people there up, but he said they don't believe me. He said, I tell them that in America they put fluoride in the water and they think I'm a crazy conspiracist. They don't believe that that would happen, that anybody would do that, because they've never fluoridated the water in Denmark. But they do that here. And even though we can politically get active and we can try to change things individually, we still need to ultimately take responsibility for our own health and for that of our family. And so I want to give you this report here that we got, and right after it, I want to talk with you, Paul, about what's going to actually be collected up front on people. Besides Social Security number, there's a wealth of information that's then going to be tracking everything about Americans. Besides just their conversations that the NSA is doing, they're going to create a complete financial profile of you and your family. What will they use that for? We'll talk about that right after this report.
In January of this year, I sent Jakari Jackson and other Infowars.com reporters to the west coast of the United States to investigate the reports of massive radiation spikes, 10 times in some cases what the background radiation is supposed to be. Professional groups, private organizations, and citizens alike were going out with their field meters and Geiger counters and picking up huge spikes in San Francisco, Los Angeles, but as far north as Seattle. Jakari and our reporters not only confirmed increased radiation, they found it all over the western coastline.
Why is this not a national news story? Why is this not an international news story that these power plants are registering lower radiation than what is being found in Half Moon Bay?
We had witnessed a coordinated cover-up by Tokyo Electric and the Japanese government of the cancers and deaths and thyroid ailments plaguing Japan in the first 3 years after the disaster. So the question was, is there a cover-up going on in the United States and North America as a whole? Turns out the EPA, within just a few months of the Fukushima disaster, with the trade winds and currents coming right into the United States, had indeed raised the levels of what they claimed was safe for the population. In some cases, more than 1,000 times what they had previously claimed was safe. So we continued to investigate and noticed that just a few months after Fukushima, tuna had been caught off the coast of the United States with higher levels of radiation. Buried in reports that got little or no attention, we began to discover massive deformities in whales and other sea life, seal die-offs, starfish die-offs, massive fish die-offs. And when our reporters went and tested the fish that were being caught off the coast of California, the radiation levels spiked dramatically.
It's almost double.
There's a reason I sent my reporters to the West Coast. It's to draw attention to the fact that the nuclear industries in the United States and worldwide are out of control. More than 75% of reactors in North America are currently leaking. In the past, every one of these leaks would have been a huge issue. Now, it's as if radiation is good for us. In fact, Ann Coulter and others have come out and said that we should be thankful for the radiation. The Japanese should be thankful because, after all, it's good for them.
Radiation in excess of what the governments
says are the minimum amounts you should be exposed to are actually good for you and reduce cases of cancer.
Tell that to all the valiant rescue workers who tried to secure the damaged plant who've now succumbed from radiation sickness and died. And tell that to the sailors and crew of the USS Ronald Reagan, many of which are dead and dying now from radiation poisoning. And the VA will not give them any care and basically puts them on a death panel list to wait and die.
Our sources tell us many were placed on a secret list designed by VA managers to hide the fact veterans were waiting months to see a doctor.
Bottom line, it is important that we draw attention to the fact that this industry is out of control. And we also draw attention to the fact that the federal government itself is ordering millions and millions of dosages of potassium iodide for federal workers while telling the general population that, oh, you don't need to have that unless you live right next door to a nuclear power plant.
They're acting like they're preparing for some sort of nuclear emergency right now, because we now know that the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, they just ordered an unprecedented 14 million doses of potassium iodide, which, you know, protects the body in the event of radioactive poisoning. So the federal government, they are already acting as if there's been a severe nuclear accident. Does that concern you as much as it does me?
Oh, yes, it concerns me not only as a journalist, but as a just general citizen.
The truth is, radiation is an invisible poison that's all around us, and the levels of it are going up. It was in my research to find ways to try to shield my family or mitigate the dangers of increased radiation that I discovered that iodine was a key component and that the government was hoarding it. But the type of iodine they're hoarding is something you only take during a huge disaster, not something that you take on a daily basis that from the research helps your glands and body overall to be healthier. That's why we developed with Dr. Edward Group Survival Shield, a proprietary new form of nascent iodine. Survival Shield has been incredibly popular because of the results people have gotten, but also because it's more palatable and easier for children to take. It's not as harsh as some of the other iodines that are out there. We innovated with Survival Shield Nascent Iodine, and it's still available and is excellent. But we are now very excited to introduce X2. There is no other iodine anywhere near this. The other so-called nascent iodines are black and turn black on paper. The Survival Shield Nascent Iodine turns electric blue purple because it's from the pure crystal. You can literally see these ancient crystals seething with the iodine. If you think Survival Shield was powerful, X2 is the next level. Take the InfoWars challenge. Regardless, you're getting high-quality iodine that on record the government admits everyone needs. It's essential, and you're supporting the very tip of the spear in revolutionary pro-liberty media. X2 from InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. There's no other iodine like it on Earth.
Over and over again, I hear people say they would never do anything to willingly harm people, and yet the very same people that Darren McBreen was talking about in that report there, the Health and Human Services, they were the ones who were involved in this experiment on premature infants. They would do that to them if they would give veterans depleted uranium. You know, now, is it any surprise to people what we see happening at the VA? When we see that they have exposed their troops knowingly to depleted uranium after they had at first banned it because of the health consequences, the same as they did with fluoride, they're not really concerned about the health consequences. That's why we've got to take it on our own. Isn't that correct, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the ultimate tool of self-empowerment is getting control of your health. Anyone can do it. It doesn't take some mass organized action to do that. So, that's right. I mean, that is one area where you can achieve complete success on your own if you're knowledgeable about the issues. So, I mean, once you get your health back on track, then your mind starts to function better. You can think clearer. You can create content easier. You can write better. So that is the source of everything. If you've got a solid basis, then you can move forward onto other areas with more gusto and more success.
And it's really is an info war. Just as we're trying to get people educated about the health effects, get them to understand that the government is capable of doing things to people, as we've seen over and over again with the experiments at University of North Carolina, with the experiments at the University of Alabama, deliberately doing things that are going to harm people's health, not getting informed consent, doing things that they would not be ethically or legally allowed to do, even if they had informed consent. And as we see, tomorrow is going to be the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. What are they trying to do? They're trying to block information about it. We have an article here. Google is reportedly banned in China ahead of the Tiananmen Square anniversary. They said they reportedly blocked all Google services just for days before the 25th anniversary of the military clampdown on student protests centered around Beijing's Tiananmen Square. The reported blockage, which has not been confirmed by the Chinese government, you think they'll confirm that, Paul, is believed to be a deliberate act of censorship leading up to the anniversary tomorrow on June 4th. They even grabbed a fellow, Guo Jing, as he was taken away from his home in suburban Beijing. He's one of the former protesters that were there. He's going to be locked away. He's now in jail. He's going to be locked away until June 15th. And then, of course, later this week, the next day, is going to be the one-year anniversary of Ed Snowden's leaks. And the feds are now cooperating with Wikipedia editors to improve Wikipedia entries related to government publications. Paul, this sounds very much like what we were seeing happening at Bilderberg. And we talk about how the major media, the mainstream media, the old media, has been complicit in covering up information that would be embarrassing to the government. Now we see that happening here at Wikipedia. They have the Office of the Federal Register, OFR, part of the National Archives, is hosting an editathon to focus on improving Wikipedia entries related to government publications. And the interesting thing, Paul, is that what they single out here in the quote, they said specific accomplishments from the event include a new article for CFR sections, a new model for future articles about the CFR. And, of course, the Council on Foreign Relations has been a large part of the global government, a large part of the American government. Pretty much every president since it was created up until 2000, every president, every presidential candidate except for Goldwater and Reagan were CFR members. And then when Reagan got appointed, he put in over 300 CFR members into the Foreign Service, into the government bureaucracy there. So they're going to work. The government's going to work with Wikipedia to make sure that they have the accurate information out there. In other words, information that the government wants out there about the CFR and about other government agencies. So now we see that kind of metastasizing even into the internet.
Going back to the China thing to begin with, there is another aspect to it which you've got to take into consideration, which is the fact that we've seen these attacks over the past few months that are getting more and more violent by the Uyghurs. This is a separatist group in the northwest of China linked to other terrorist organizations like the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which came out of Afghanistan in the 80s and was CIA-backed. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that these Uyghur attacks are also being CIA-backed because they want to make China unstable. They want to try and create a Ukraine-style situation, which, of course, would be Ukraine on a much bigger scale, and eventually topple the Chinese government with a fake Chinese spring. So you have to look at who's behind these groups that are behind these increasingly violent attacks in China to know that it's part of the agenda regarding Obama's pivot to Asia. It's about destabilizing the Chinese government because it's now, with this new gas deal, joining together with Russia and posing a threat to the unipolar world that the West stands for. So
they're shifting alliances, and we're going to talk about that in the third hour. We're going to be joined with Richie Allen, and he's going to talk to us about what's going on at Bilderberg. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight with Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. We were talking just before the break about what's going on in China. As Paul was pointing out, there's shifting alliances that are happening. We've got China and Russia working together, as well as now Bilderberg. Perhaps one of the biggest things they were talking about there were the transatlantic and trans-Pacific partnerships, these kind of trade agreements that mirror what Rockefeller and others have been trying to create in the Trilateral Commission for several decades. But, Paul, there was an article that was up on prisonplanet.com about China sending 4 more fighter jets to oil rig area as Vietnam threatens legal action. I thought that was pretty amazing. So there's not just the tension between the United States and Japan, between China and the United States and Japan together, but also now even China with Vietnam. And of course, the Vietnam War was very much a part of my life earlier, and to see that Vietnam is no domino and really never was it?
Well, exactly, and there was also a China-Vietnam War as well, which killed tens and tens of thousands of people.
Yes.
But this began on May 2nd when China basically just dumped a huge state-owned oil rig inside Vietnamese territory, inside their exclusive economic zone. So, it was accompanied by PLA warships at the time, so Vietnam could do very little to repel it without starting some kind of conflict. A couple of weeks ago, we had reports of PLA troops being sent to the Vietnamese border to deal with some kind of conflict. So people down there are very, very concerned. People are evacuating in droves. Now today we've had this new report. So again, it's another flashpoint. It shows us that we need to be wary of all these different flashpoints around the world. And with Obama's pivot to Asia, they're increasingly going to be in that region of the world.
I see, as we come to the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, I see that CNN is patting itself on the back for covering it, and I'm glad that they cover it. And there's kind of a sense of American superiority that we're not censoring the news like China is censoring the news of Tiananmen Square, and yet we really do. When I look at the story about China and Vietnam, it reminds me of the documentary The Fog of War. That's a 2004 film from documentary filmmaker Errol Morris, where he interviewed Robert McNamara. And McNamara said it was an extended interview that he turned into a feature-length documentary, and Robert McNamara said in that he had since gone back to Vietnam, and when he was talking to the Vietnamese general about it, the Vietnamese general at one point got up and angrily slammed the table and said, "Why did you do this? You say that you did this to stop the domino theory. We've been fighting China for thousands of years for our independence. Don't you know anything about history?" And yet, with the Gulf of Tonkin and with the complicit media, they were able to keep that secret from the American public, keep that out of the textbooks in America, just like China has been able to keep Tiananmen Square out of the news, out of the textbooks.
Oh, no. I mean, you go to China and nobody knows what Tiananmen Square was. It's only people who've moved out of the country and then gone back again. That's the only way that awareness of it has spread, because there was a complete lockdown on information, obviously. But with that, I always hark back to the David Rockefeller quote: "Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history." This is an administration that killed upwards of 30 million people. And of course, the Tiananmen Square protesters were anti-communist. So that goes to the heart of how the global elite view these different genocides around the world. David Rockefeller. And people say, "Oh, that's a fake quote." I found the original New York Times article from 1973. It's documented. It's a real quote. A lot of these quotes, David, you do find them to be false, but that's a genuine David Rockefeller quote about a regime that killed upwards of 30 million people. He said it was a success.
And if you like Mao's social engineering and massive starvation, you're going to love what the Bilderberg Group is planned for us. We'll be right back with Richie Allen. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined via Skype by Paul Joseph Watson out of the UK. We're also going to be joined in the next segment with Richie Allen, also from the UK, and he's going to give us his perspective on Bilderberg. But Paul, as we were there this last week watching the most wealthy and powerful multinational corporation CEOs, as well as politicians and spy masters going in, and we were photographing them as they were going in. We pretty much had unprecedented access in terms of visually seeing these people, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next segment. But I was struck with this article that was at Infowars.com. For the first time ever, more than half the members of Congress are millionaires. Now, we talk about insider trading. We got those pictures of Ed Balls, the UK Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, going in with a suitcase full of papers. He's trying to go through his suitcase, trying to find his pass to get into Bilderberg. And we filmed that, and Karen got that. And it was really a comical video, but on one level. But the other level, it showed just how much information was being brought into the conference. He wasn't taking that out. That wasn't handouts that they gave him at Bilderberg. He was taking that in. And so one of the aspects that's very troubling about this, or these closed-door meetings like this, is perhaps insider trading.
Well, we know from the 2006 leak out of Canada that they had positioned themselves financially for the economic collapse. Estulin got that information out. He also predicted from what Bilderberg was saying that the housing bubble was going to pop, that they were going to get all the suckers to invest their money, and that it was to pop in 2007, which is exactly what happened. So we know that they positioned themselves before financial collapse. So to think that insider trading is a part of that is a given, because we know they were positioning themselves before it happened in 2008 to prevent them from getting the harm while everybody else lost their jobs and their homes.
Absolutely, yeah. They make a big example out of Martha Stewart, and yet when it broke that members of Congress were doing insider trading, they passed a little bit of superficial legislation and then essentially repealed the guts of it before it ever took place. We've got a special caller on the line before we get to Richie Allen. We've got Alex Jones wanted to pop in with a comment. Alex?
That's right, gentlemen. I am driving along listening to you guys on the free iPhone app, and I just wanted to back up what Watson said. Look, they out of hand deny these New World Order quotes are real, and I've gone and looked them up and sent my crew over and over again to the UT library, and about 80+% of the time they're real quotes. We went personally to the UT library. We even have film of us in the microfilm. It's in my film Endgame, just as it was cinematic to show us running the microfilm through finding the New York Times article in 1973 where he praises Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer in history. The CIA says he killed 66 million. The Chinese government says that now 84 million died under Mao. Whatever, it's over 60 million, greatest mass murderer in history. And here's David Rockefeller praising communism as the model. So I just wanted to point out, we could do a whole news report sometime just off that original Endgame clip and showing, just as a stunt, to show people don't get exposed out of foreign affairs and out of all these publications where they call for planetary world government, where they call for authoritarianism, showing Harold Quigley's book. That's just a clear unseen stunt where they always go, nobody calls for world government. Gordon Brown didn't call for that. David Rockefeller, Obama didn't say you should build your business. Obama didn't say that your health care wouldn't go up. Obama said he said it wouldn't go up, and we got the damn clips. So it's just this out-of-hand denial, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, we question known liars. By the way, listening to you guys are just doing a great job, and it's so good to be able to sit back with my family, all doing research and stuff, and listen to you guys kick butt. So I'll be back tomorrow, folks. Other folks riding shotgun, but I'll throw it back to you guys to go. And God bless all the listeners, everybody. I'm just so honored to be part of the InfoWars operation. And so thankful to God that we're able to expose the murdering criminal.
That's right, Alex. They want to run this down the memory hole, but we're not going to let them. You can see it on the documentary. You can see it at InfoWars. We'll be right back with Richie Allen. Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined with Paul Joseph Watson. We were in Copenhagen looking for Henry Kissinger, the doctor of our dreams. Actually, we were trying to discover, as they said in the song, his Machiavellian schemes. And also joining us from the UK is Richie Allen. Now, he's someone who is head of news of the People's Voice. It's an internet television channel that was the brainchild of David Icke. He's active in Ireland, the UK, and Spain, and he's been following the Bilderberg situation, and I'd like to get his take on it, along with Paul. We want to talk to him about his perception of this year's Bilderberg. Richie, are you there?
David, I am. How are you? How are you, Paul? Nice to be with you.
Doing good. Thank you for joining us. Now, this year was a little bit different. Paul and I were there, and we've people that have been there for several of these events, like Paul, said this was very unprecedented to be this close to them, that we could get the kind of photographs that we could. In a sense, we were kind of like paparazzi, politerazzi, but we were there to document that this is really going on, that these people are really there, and try to get people to the public to understand that this is something that was covered up by the mainstream media for decades. They denied that this even existed. Then they attack as conspiracy theorists, as loonies, anyone who talks about its existence. So maybe there is something here. What do you think?
Well, I think it was notable for the fact, of course, it was the 60th anniversary of the very first Bilderberg meeting. And I heard Paul mention in the last few days Jim Tucker, who's no longer with us. Jim is somebody who I spoke to on the radio over the years. And I always like to mention Jim and David Icke and Alex Jones, because I think those three have done more than anybody else over the years when nobody was paying attention to Bilderberg. They've done more than anybody, I think, David, to bring it to people's attention. I wasn't there. We covered it on our show on late last week, Thursday and Friday. And I'm not one for, I'm not a doomsayer, I'm not one for depressing people. But I'd like to ask you guys, because you were there, we got a sense from our own audience that there's a little bit of Bilderberg fatigue, if you understand what I mean. There was a huge, obviously it was in Watford in England last year, just outside London. A massive attention on it in England, more than it's ever gotten before, I think. There was even a question, I might remember, Paul, help me out here if I get any of this wrong, but I remember Michael Meacher, former Environment Minister, I believe he asked Kenneth Clarke, the so-called Minister without portfolio, as he was then, in Parliament about it. Again, unprecedented that it would be spoken about in Parliament. We get the impression, or I've gotten the impression from some of our viewers, that they think, well, you guys, and I don't mean me, but you guys like you have been covering it for years, David Icke, you've gotten it out there now, but what next? What next? We know these guys are meeting annually. We know who's there now, again, because of the brilliant investigative journalism of Tucker and Icke and Alex Jones. But what next? I don't know if you got a sense of that when you were there. Did you get that sense at all?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'm not getting Richie's audio, so I don't know.
You're not getting his audio. He was asking you if you got a sense that there was some Bilderberg fatigue amongst the people who've been following this, the general public.
Well, there definitely is in Denmark, because in comparison to last year, there were about 100 people this year at the height of the protest, but Icke and Jones, who were obviously the draw last year, weren't there. But somebody told me that 30% of the Danish population are on antidepressant drugs. So maybe that's an explanation. But the general thought was that people in that area, people in Scandinavia, have been pacified by the EU. They've been made dependent on government, so they're less likely to protest against something like Bilderberg. And as you said earlier, they're more nervous about being public in their dissent. So there are some very good reasons there as to why the protest was less than it was last year. Of course, last year was more of a festival. It was probably better organized in terms of the goal of getting people into one place. Obviously, location plays a big part as well. I think Canada is probably up for Bilderberg next year, if not the year after. So you're going to see probably 5 times more people at least, simply because of the location. So I think there are different explanations behind that. But yes, I was disappointed in the turnout in Copenhagen.
But Paul, I think that the large turnout last year, because essentially last year you really didn't have very much access. You really couldn't see anything. They had everybody so far away from where the Bilderberg attendees were, and yet people were getting together in that kind of fringe festival that they called it for Bilderberg, where people who had been following it kind of got together themselves and talked about what they had learned, talked about what was going on there. This time, I think that really had an effect on the way Bilderberg interacted with people. They came out with, as you called it, a bizarre charm offensive. I think that was the interesting thing about this year's coverage, how they tried to be, I guess you would say, a little bit more transparent, although they really didn't have any transparency, releasing an agenda, whether or not that was true or not. And as we found out when we talked to Samson, the leader of the Dutch Labour Party, that's there, when he came out and talked, he kind of let slip that there were some things besides what was on the official agenda. But it was really pretty bizarre that he came out and addressed the crowd, wasn't it?
Well, he came out several times. He came out once, I think it was on the Friday, and he was outside the protest pen. Then the next day he came back to be inside the protest pen, because we actually got him on the street as he was walking up to the protest pen. And that kind of devolved into a long, drawn-out debate about 9/11 and vaccines and all these different kind of issues, when I just wanted to know what they were talking about inside the building right at that point. And those are the only questions which he didn't really want to answer. He was happy to get involved in these long global warming debates, etc. But we didn't drill him enough on what they were discussing this year inside the Bilderberg Hotel. But in terms of press access, it was far better than last year. Last year, we were kept a mile away from the hotel. We never even saw a Bilderberger in the flesh if they weren't inside a vehicle. This year, they went on walkabout numerous times. We had several different press areas, one immediately adjacent to the hotel, so we could see them right on the patio. And people don't appreciate, I think, how difficult that is and how rare that is. I mean, Hannah Bono compared it to spotting wild animals, and that's precisely...
they are kind of like wild animals, aren't they?
Exactly, but it's so difficult to get them on camera in the flesh. The fact that we had the press access to do that was a big victory.
Yeah, and the fact that we saw balls carrying in these volumes of paperwork, I think that was very telling. They go in, that combined with the fact that they're walking about and jogging about freely without any bodyguards, without even a companion attendee from Bilderberg. What do you make of that, Richie Allen? The fact that these people who have erected, they always spend millions of dollars to create these walls and security. They've had an army of police there, and yet they just walk out on their own and go jogging. What do you make of that?
The only thing you can make of that, David, the only logical conclusion to that is that they're somehow trying to play down the importance of it. And by lessening the security on there, and by doing what Paul said there, being a little bit more up close and personal, people getting access to them, seeing them. I mean, you said they couldn't be seen in Watford. I mean, I noticed that last year. So you can only conclude that, yeah, they're thinking, well, we need to be a little bit more less menacing, a little bit more less threatening, make as little of this as we possibly can. And I mean, ultimately, they want us to believe that it's an annual fraternity. Isn't that right, David? That's what they want us to believe, ultimately. Right. It's where we can meet and speak freely without worrying about the press misrepresenting us. And all we're doing is sharing ideas because, because we've all got these all-powerful, high-pressure jobs. So this is a kind of get-to-know-you session once every year. Now, we know that's a load of baloney. We know that. So I presume that somewhere in the steering committee must have got together and said, you know what, let's come at this a little bit differently this year. I mean, we've seen on one or two other alternative news sites, I won't mention them, but we've seen one or two of the attendees being grabbed and interviewed, even if the interviews were very brief. So that staggered me, there's no doubt about that, because I've not been watching Bilderberg as often or as much as you guys have and Alex. I've come to this arena only in the last few years, but what I have seen in the last few years is exactly as you described: high walls, lots of security, menacing. I mean, we all remember years ago Jim Tucker being trailed through the Portuguese countryside by men in blacked out sedans and all that sort of stuff.
That's
so
right.
Yeah, maybe there's a concerted effort to well, let's play this down a bit.
Yeah, for years they pretended that it didn't exist. They kept the press at bay. They tried that sort of thing, but they couldn't get away with that anymore because I think to a large degree all of the attention that happened last year in the UK. So even though we didn't have a lot of individuals turning up, they came out with a very different approach this time. As Paul pointed out, it's really kind of a charm offensive, trying to make themselves look transparent. But I thought it was kind of interesting when Samson came out and talked to us, the Dutch leader, and he was talking about these focus groups, how they went from one meeting to the other meeting. It sounded very, very much like the kind of Delphi control techniques that the RAND Corporation has developed for pushing Agenda 21 at local community meetings. And it looks like that's what they're doing to me. It looks like you've got a core group of globalists who are bringing in people, kind of testing the water, seeing if they can get them to buy into a consensus. And then if they do, they bring them on to additional meetings, a trilateral commission meeting, a Council on Foreign Relations meeting, creating these kinds of relationships that allow them to essentially pull people into a kind of a phony consensus. Would you say that's what's happening? Certainly there's not some leader of the world that's sitting there.
David, I'll tell you what, I'm not kissing your backside, but that's one of the smartest things I've heard suggested about Bilderberg. Because we have to remember, these politicians, greedy and filthy and corrupt though they are, ultimately they're human beings. And some of the things that's on the agenda for us in the next 25, 30, 40 years are horrifying things that would shake any human being to their foundation, irrespective of their their psychological state. So it makes perfect sense to me that there's some sort of indoctrination going on there. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, bringing these people in, I wouldn't use the word brainwashing them, but yeah, browbeating them with ideas and getting them to come around to ideas that ordinarily, if they were with their families, their wives, their girlfriends, their husbands, they wouldn't do.
Hang on, we got Richie Allen with us, as well as Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. We're talking about how Bilderberg changed this year. We're going to be right back after the break. Stay with us. It's all about building consensus, and these people control a lot of assets.
How long
Stay
would
tuned.
you last?
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in Austin, and in the UK, I'm joined by Paul Joseph Watson and Richie Allen of the People's Voice. Now, gentlemen, it was actually after Bilderberg last year, if I'm correct, that the Snowden documents were leaked. We got the anniversary, the first-year anniversary of that coming up in just 2 days. Although last year on their agenda, as they said, one of the things they were looking at was big data. And they had David Petraeus, I believe, representatives from, well, we had Palantir there, Alex Karp last year, also returned this year, as did David Petraeus, as did Keith Alexander, the head of the NSA. And one of the topics there that they put on their official agenda that they released was, does privacy exist? You guys find that ironic? Go ahead, Richie, let's get your comments on that.
Well, yeah, to say the least, ironic. Yeah, I mean, timely, nearly a year since, or just about a year since the Snowden leaks. I was really interested last week, not to jump off topic, but just to kind of segue a little bit, John Kerry's comments on CNN, the Secretary of State, of course, saying that, Snowden should come back, to prove that he's a patriot. If he really stands over what he did, and if he really believes in what he did as being the right thing to do, well, he should come back and face the music. And I was thinking, watching that, well, that didn't go very well for Chelsea Manning. And I know that Chelsea Manning didn't go on the run, especially. And again, we love the internet, and we love organisations like the People's Voice, like InfoWars, and. You guys again are going to have to help me out here, because U.S. history is not my greatest subject. But didn't John Kerry once sit in front of a congressional committee, not long after he came back from Vietnam, on the side of transparency, on the side of openness and getting information out to people? I mean, you could choke on the irony of it, you could choke on the irony of it. So, yeah, there's no doubt they're talking about it. And, of course, data and the mining of data and privacy and all of that of course, segues into the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all of that. So, yeah, I'm really interested in that. And we're finding it's one of the topics that our viewers at TPV are really interested in.
Yeah, I want to talk about, we don't have much time in this segment, but I do want to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership, how that reflects what they planned for a long time. But Paul, when we talk about them asking if privacy exists, I think when we look at that film of Ed Balls coming in with massive amounts of data on paper, on printed paper, they understand, because they're the ones that have created this environment, that you don't have any electronic privacy. I think, to me, I look at them and the fact that they were just roaming around freely in the area, what they really were protecting was the anonymity and the discussions in their meetings. They weren't protecting the attendees. They were protecting the meetings, the information that they were exchanging face-to-face on paper documents in a hotel that had been evacuated days in advance and screened for any kind of electronic listening devices. What would you say?
Well, that's right. They're protecting the information. That's why none of them will talk about what they discussed. They'll talk about there being intensive meetings non-stop. And as you mentioned before the break, it is kind of like a cult for the global elite. You could compare it to the TED conference, which about a year ago it came out from some members of that who were invited along, that it is a kind of cult. They're ordered which people to room with. They're ordered on how to treat people when they meet them. And it's very insidious. And I think that a similar kind of thing takes place at Bilderberg. Of course, we know they have these big presentations, then they have the smaller sub-conference groups. Certain people are allowed into those conferences, certain people aren't. So it is a kind of access cult. And we even have pictures of certain Bilderberg members who seem to be ostracized from the rest of the group as they're out on the patio having cocktails. So it's very much an elite within an elite. Most of the Bilderberg members probably aren't even aware of the inner core and what they actually want. They're just being groomed to potentially go up the ladder at a later date. But with regard to privacy, I mean, look at Eric Schmidt. I mean, he's there every year. What did he say? Quote, if you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Yeah,
so
I think
is the guy.
I think Eric Schmidt could probably answer that question. I think Eric Schmidt could probably answer that question for him pretty definitively, don't you think, Paul?
Well, exactly. And that does privacy exist, and these are the people who are talking about it. They want to destroy privacy. It's not how to rescue it, it's how to eviscerate it to an even greater degree. That's what they're discussing, because their history, their quotes tell us that.
Exactly. Yeah, so you got people asking if there's any privacy left so they can squash it, because we've got Google's Eric Schmidt, we've got David Petraeus from the CIA, we've got Keith Alexander from the NSA. We've got Alex Cart from Palantir, who is there to data mine what these other guys steal, all the information they steal about everybody, and try to create relationships from it. That's essentially what Palantir is about. I think one of the most important things that can come out of this, besides getting people to understand this is actually going on, is how their structure is, what their plan is for the world. And I think we see what David Rockefeller's goals were, what he stated back in 1973 when he created the Trilateral Commission. We see that now coming to fruition in these transatlantic trade partnership agreements, also the Trans-Pacific partnership agreements. We're going to talk about that when we come back. We have Richie Allen from the UK, as well as Paul Joseph Watson.
We're on the march.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight here in Austin, and joining me from the UK are Paul Joseph Watson and Richie Allen of the People's Voice Internet News Channel. Now, when we were in Copenhagen, we didn't have time to go sightseeing, but one of the things that I would have loved to have seen, maybe I'll go back someday and see it, is Kronborg Castle. Now, this was the site of Shakespeare's Hamlet, also known as Elsinore Castle. Now, according to legend, this statue that we opened up with, if you're watching this, according to legend, kind of a King Arthur type of myth, this was a Danish king called Holger the Dane. They say that he returned to rescue France after things that were happening in England, then traveled to Kronborg Castle, where he sleeps until he is needed to save his homeland. I bought that statue because I think the Danish people, as well as the people of all of Europe, of North America, and of Asia, need to wake up to what's happening with these globalist plans, what is going to be happening with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with the Transatlantic Partnership. This is something that goes back to 1973 when they started the Council on Foreign Relations. Now we see this mirrored in these new trade partnership agreements that are essentially going to elevate multinational corporations and banks to the level of the nation states in order to destroy the nation states. That was the stated purpose of these commissions, of these globalist groups like the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission. Richie Allen, what do you think about the importance of waking people up to the Trans-Pacific, Transatlantic partnerships? Is there much awareness of it in the UK? There's not much awareness of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership here in America.
No, David, there isn't. And without InfoWars and without the People's Voice TV, there would be very little awareness of it. Here's an agreement being sold to people as a way to bring about fair trade and to help developing economies and bringing developing economies into the fold and having a one-size-fits-all agreement that's fair to every country. But here's an agreement that I believe Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman, two well-known economists, have said basically only serves the interests of the wealthiest. And you mentioned earlier on, and I heard Alex talking earlier on in the broadcast, about the provisions there for corporations to, in fact, sue governments when they don't like what governments are doing. I don't know if you know this, you probably will. Maybe some of your viewers won't know. But this was put to the, in a big poll in New Zealand, it was put to the New Zealanders back in 2012. I'm sure Paul will know this. And they were asked to give an opinion as to whether they thought it was a good thing that corporations could sue democratically elected governments. No surprise, 64%, nearly 2/3 of New Zealand said no, it's not a good idea. I'll tell you what I think it is, David. And I'm new compared to you guys and Alex. I'm pretty new. I worked in the mainstream media for a long time, and it's only really been the last 4 or 5 years that I kind of came out and had a good look at what was going on and what was being reported and what was not being reported and why. So maybe my analysis is going to be a little bit immature, maybe. But I'm going to say this. It seems to me that corporations are out to do nothing other than privatize every square inch of land on this planet.
Yes.
And whatever they have to do to bring that about, they'll go and do it. Now, I won't rant on too much because Paul wants to get in, but I was thinking today, I come from Ireland, obviously. You're probably saying, tell me another one. You obviously know I'm Irish with this accent, this outrageous accent that I have.
That's great.
I'm from Waterford in Ireland. My country's been decimated by the IMF and the European Union.
Yeah.
Decimated. We've lost the electricity supply board there. We've lost the forestry. We've had to give pretty much all of our state assets to the IMF to pay back debts that we really didn't have. And what that makes me think, and I'd love to hear Paul's opinion on this, David, what do they need these agreements for? What more do they need to do? They're doing it already anyway. Governments have been completely taken over by corporations anyway. So why the need for these bloody agreements? I don't get it. I really don't.
That's right. Yeah, Paul, the European Union was something that Davignon bragged about, the fact, a chairman of Bilderberg, bragged about the fact that they created the idea for the European Union as well as the Euro in just their second meeting 59 years ago. This was the 60th anniversary of the Bilderberg Group meeting. So what do you think what do you think they need? They want to have every last bit of private property on the planet, don't they?
Well, yeah, this TTIP is another pillar of world government, and it's about taking away any shred of representative nation-state government in America or Europe. I mean, look at the people who are behind this TTIP. Jose Manuel Barroso, Herman Van Rompuy, both key Bilderberg luminaries. The guy running it from the US side is Obama's US Trade Representative Michael Froman, CFR member, Wall Street insider. This is a guy who made out like a bandit in his position as Citigroup managing director back in 2008 during the economic crisis. So this is a kind of world company. It's about joining Europe and America together under a pillar of world government. It's being called the economic NATO. And just as the European Union began as a free trade area and is now a political federation, basically, where in some countries upwards of 50% or more of laws are dictated, are created, implemented on orders of the EU with no nation-state representative democracy whatsoever. That's the plan now for America, and that's how they're trying to get it done, through creating this world company via the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement. So that's what it's about, because Froman is also behind the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the America-Asian Union. So they're still intent on building this world government, which they plan to have in place by the year 2000. It's being derailed again and again. They're still pursuing it feverishly, and this TTIP is part of that centralization of power into fewer and fewer hands.
You know, it echoes not just the goals of these globalist groups like the Trilateral Commission, like the Bilderberg Group, but it also echoes their operational methods, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership is being negotiated by corporations without even any input from the democratically elected people of the nations that are going to be affected by that. U.S. senators are not allowed to see what's going on in this trade agreement. What we know for sure about it are really just echoes and leaks like we get from the Bilderberg Group. So it's essentially having the public completely shut out of any information about this, absolutely no openness, no transparency, no disclosure. We only know things for sure that we've seen from it that have been leaked by WikiLeaks. And so we know that it goes beyond just economics. We've got real issues of taking over control of the internet. We've got, as democratic countries have rejected CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, we now see that these guys are going to enact this through the back door, where they can essentially shut down any internet site just with an accusation of copyright laws. And of course, it's also going to affect the way people get their medicine, where they're going to extend out the copyright terms for these pharmaceutical companies, even if it violates national law, because these partnership agreements would take precedent over it. And to make it clear, when they have these arbitration sessions that would happen, this would put the corporations, just the multinational corporations, mind you, not local corporations within a country, but only the ones that are multinational corporations, they would have equal status in these arbitration schemes to sovereign nation states. Paul, well, let's go to Richie Allen. Richie, what do you think about that? Give us your take on it.
You couldn't argue with a single thing you've said. But I repeat again, and I'm sorry if I'm boring you, but it's a case of overkill, really. We're covering a story on the People's Voice that you guys are interested in as well, and it's about an Australian farmer called Steve Marsh who sued his neighbour for cross-contaminating his crop with GM crops. Steve is an organic farmer in Australia. This guy next door to him is growing GM canola. And so, of course, Steve lost his organic certification. In other words, the government said, Steve, you're not an organic farmer anymore because you've got this stuff in your crop. So, of course, that's not good for Steve because organic crops cost a little bit more. They cost a bit more to cultivate, but they also make more of a profit. So he's lost out on a few dollars. So, of course, he sues, as he would do, the next door neighbour, the nearby farmer. And he loses. And this is extraordinary. The government who took the organic certification away from him basically said to him, nobody's responsible for you losing your organic certification. And to make matters worse then, his neighbour who was sued by Steve was bankrolled to the tune of God knows how much money by Monsanto for the court case. And I believe, and I can't name them, David, but I believe the senior agricultural ministers in Australia have gone on the record in the last few days to say they're absolutely delighted with the decision. So I say again, why the need for this bloody new agreement? Because what they want to do with it, they're doing already anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Well, here in the U.S., we had the Supreme Court 9-0 have a similar case where it was a farmer whose product was cross-contaminated by that, and 9-0 they sided with Monsanto, saying that he had to pay them because they had contaminated his product. We see as people are fully awake in many areas of Europe that they can then jam this down their throats, what they could not get through democratically. That's why people need to wake up to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the transatlantic partnerships that are being done there. These things are being negotiated in secret, just as they are at Bilderberg. We've seen for a long time that the globalist agenda was to have regional consolidation like NAFTA, like the EU, then to combine Europe to America, to Asia for world governance, for world domination by these corporations. Paul, what do you think about
I think they're basically trying to plug the leaks in the agenda because they keep trying to implement this and it just keeps leaking again and again. I mean, look at the recent resistance in the Euro elections. I mean, a lot of those parties have policies that I don't agree with, but the fact that in places like Denmark, France and the UK and other countries, they were dealt a huge blow by these anti-globalist, anti-EU parties in the Euro elections. I mean, that's got them panicked. We know Bilderberg were panicked about that. They leaked the agenda beforehand. They said they were going to be discussing that. So as the push gets stronger and stronger for world government, the resistance complements it in some senses. So I think this is why they're trying to really jam it down now. And this TTIP is basically about, you know, it's not free market, it's mercantilism, it's crapitalism, as some refer to it, because it's going to drive down wages, it's going to eviscerate the middle class, as all these agreements, you know, NAFTA, GATT do. We've proven that. You know, it's about the carrot of fake prosperity, promises that they're going to create all these jobs, when in actual fact it's about eroding what little accountability the US government has left to its citizens.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully that's the one thing that can come out of our coverage, that can come out of this if people start to look at what's being done. Why do we have this secretive meeting? Why do we have these secretive trade negotiations that are essentially affecting everything? We have people like the Electronic Freedom Foundation are getting involved in this because they said this is not simply about economic issues. It would be bad enough if it were, but it's about many things far beyond that affects whether or not we're going to have any say-so at all in our lives. We had one of the fellows there, one of the security guards, the first day. I said, you know, people are going to be deciding things for your future, and you're not going to have any say in it. And his response was, well, I hope that they decide well. He doesn't have a problem with that. Richie Allen, how do people feel about that? Are they just think that these elite technocrats can make these decisions for people and they don't need to have any input whatsoever into it?
No, I think things are changing. And again, this is not blowing our trumpets, our collective trumpets, but InfoWars and David Icke and davidicke.com and The People's Voice. We're making a huge change, I think, because Paul said something very interesting there. He mentioned we don't like the class system. We don't like the words working class, middle class. But there is a middle class. There is a class of people, David, who've always been comfortable. They've always had enough and they've never suffered. And I think now we're seeing, and Paul is absolutely right, we've seen the results in the European Union elections in Britain and in Ireland and around Europe and France, and I agree with Paul, these unsavoury characters in some of these parties, Golden Dawn, Marine Le Pen's party in France, these are awful people. But the middle class, people who are used to doing okay, even when times are tough, are now getting squeezed beyond belief. And when that, I always believed that when that happened, you are going to see change. People are going to stand up and say, no, we're not going to have this anymore. Well, we could be here all night long talking about the media. The media is a disgrace. I worked in the mainstream media for a long time, and all we ever did was ripped and read, David. We ripped and read press releases. We did interviews where we were as tame as a kitten in terms of the questions we asked government ministers and senior politicians. An absolute disgrace. And of course, we see in Britain, we see in Ireland, what's remaining of the media, independent commercial radio stations, independent television stations, they're disappearing at a rate of knots. We've got companies like Global in Britain, Bauer in Britain, owning, the vast majority of commercial radio stations, which is why, of course, they managed to keep so much of this agenda hidden.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you said that you were embedded in mainstream media. You broke out just as Cheryl Atkinson, who just broke this story about the experimentation on premature babies. I don't know if you've heard about that. That's breaking.
I have, Paul. David, I have, and I'm horrified to hear that.
Yes.
I've been listening to the program since the start. I always hear the program, and that's an absolutely horrendous story. That it really is.
And yet, I don't believe that that's the kind of story that she would be allowed to cover at CBS, or if she was allowed to cover it, I believe they would have probably contacted the National Institute of Health and the other government agencies that were involved in setting up this horrific thing and let them do a little bit of damage control at the same time before this broke, So that's the thing that we're seeing now is people breaking out, breaking free. And I think this week, as we look at the one-year anniversary of the Snowden leaks, as we look at the 25-year anniversary of Tiananmen Square, as we see that nobody was covering this on the outside of the Bilderberg group. There were media representatives inside Bilderberg, but I think we see that the real place that people are going to wake up and where the rubber really meets the road is with an information war, trying to wake people up. So that's why I go back to what we started with in this segment, talking about the sleeping giant. Many people talk about, well, in Denmark, they have the same analogy. They've got a king that is asleep there until the Danish people need him. Everybody needs to wake up. Thank you for joining us, Richie Allen with the peoplesvoice.tv.
It was a pleasure, David. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Paul. Great stuff. Congratulations on the program. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Paul, we're going to be back after the break. We want to talk about, there's a couple of breaking stories here in the U.S. There's one about the NRA actually coming after some of the open carry demonstrators and telling them to stop this foolishness. I want to talk about that a little bit. We've also got some stories that are breaking again about China. When I was in Europe, it looked like the Financial Times that I picked up on the plane, almost every article was about China. People in America just don't realize how much it has shifted. And one of the articles that I found was interesting was the fact that China is now becoming the #1 supplier, purchaser of robots. So even though they have transferred all of our jobs to China, as part of Kissinger's plan, his grand opening to China, the globalists moved production out of the United States to China. Now even that work that the Chinese had, and they're getting paid horrendously low wages, even that is going to be taken away from them as they start to replace people in China with robots in China. We're going to be right back talking to Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK, and as we were going to break, I mentioned that when we were in Europe covering the Bilderberg meeting in Copenhagen, I was looking at some European papers. The Financial Times was all about China, from Tiananmen Square anniversary to an article entitled Beijing Hits Out at U.S. and Japan Alliance, to the story that we had at prisonplanet.com earlier about China dropping its oil rigs into Vietnam territory and going against the Vietnamese. But this is one that I wanted to get Paul's comments on. That kind of stuck out. It says, China transforms from, quote, workshop of the world, I would say sweatshop of the world, to the biggest robotics buyer. They said China bought 36,000 industrial robots last year, a rise of almost 60% over 2012. They're now in first place. Second place was Japan, and then third place was the U.S. They believe that at the rate that China is growing, it's going to be by far and away the largest robotics market. Paul, we've seen for a long time, we've seen the transformation, again, with Kissinger and others, globalists. They have moved U.S. manufacturing to China. Now they're taking even that away from the Chinese. But in the U.S., we're also going to see the loss not just of manufacturing jobs, but robotics are going to impact service jobs as well. Drivers are going to be replaced by self-driving trucks. We're going to see a lot of things happening in essentially service jobs in the United States. It looks to me like they are on path for a massive transformation of society by the 2020 to 2025 timeframe they've been talking about for a very long time.
Well, and what are the consequences? If you take away the lower paid jobs, then these people are going to be forced to become dependent on government by taking welfare.
Yes.
So they won't be dying on the streets. They'll still be at their level of poverty, but they'll just be in receipt of government welfare to an even greater degree, keeping them dependent. The skilled jobs, the intellectual jobs will still exist, but again, they'll be able to keep this huge underclass of people, which will be used as a voting bloc, completely dependent on the state, and that's what it's all about. If you go to China, though, even in like the drugstores, they have an employee, a service helper for every individual rack of shelves in the drugstore. Whereas in the UK and America, you know, you probably get a couple of people out there asking people if they want help. In China, the drugstores, in some of them, there are more employees than customers. That's the level of service employment that they currently have. Whether that will then be taken away, it's anybody's guess. But again, the overriding point is that you can take away those service jobs, replace them with robots, but still keep people dependent on welfare. I think that's what it's all about in terms of economic serfdom.
Yes, and that's exactly the point. Economic serfdom. When you're talking about taking away people's ability to move around, and it's not just as workers. What they are doing with most of these regulations that we see that are being going to be pushed by these partnership agreements that they're trying to negotiate in secret, just like most of the regulation that we see, it's about cutting off the bottom rungs of the ladder of success. It's about making sure that nobody goes into competition with the large corporations, essentially setting up a return to serfdom, as you point out, a kind of fiefdom, you know, where these people essentially own everything and everybody else is essentially workers. So you have a few overlords who own everything, like it's some kind of a feudal society, and everybody else is merely workers, and essentially taking away that middle class that we've had since the Renaissance.
Yeah, look, I mean, India, they've lifted themselves out of poverty by removing the regulation, helping small businesses. That's how you do it. You don't increase regulation to improve and save the economy. You reduce it, people become self-sufficient, they make their own money, they're less dependent on government.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Paul Joseph Watson from the UK, Infowars.com. I'm David Knight. Join us tomorrow.